crazy untold secret about everybody. Nobody has it figured out. There was a playbook that worked and companies just exploded, and it worked really well. And now it doesn't. We're going to see a lot of changes and shifts, and I don't think anybody's fully figured it out. And so in the future, what this looks like is that
Meet Andrew Hulse. You and I both know that marketing really comes down to one simple thing, and that is knowing your audience. Any of the best marketers, the ones that really stand out, really just do this one thing incredibly well. If you can understand your audience, you know their pain points, and you know when to reach them at the right time. And if you're a freelance marketer, if you're running an agency, if you're anyone who has to speak to customers, or even if you're just making content for an audience, social awareness and knowing who you're talking to is really what's going to set you apart. And today, you and I are getting to know someone who has mastered that skill and is so deep in the weeds of trying to figure this out using the most cutting-edge technologies. Andrew Hulse is a lifelong marketer, founder, and entrepreneur here in the 614. Next Tuesday, he'll be giving a panel at the one and only Dawson here in Columbus, Ohio, for agencies and freelance marketers on how to supercharge their sales and better understand their audience. So naturally, I wanted to get a pulse of Andrew beforehand, introduce myself, and introduce you all to him as well. Here's what you and I are going to be diving in with Andrew today. Expect to learn how Andrew's career at places like the Shipyard and Futurity here in Columbus have shaped his impact, how ADHD can actually be a superpower in marketing if you apply it correctly. He gives some tactical things you can walk away with in this front. How companies are using AI, especially in marketing, to learn to better understand their audience and use it in a truly innovative way, even compared it to the internet in 1997. And if you stick around until the very end, you're going to get the inside scoop on the panel February 25th at Dawson in Columbus, Ohio. All right, without putting it off any farther, please welcome Andrew Hulse onto the show. Big thank you to the man for coming on. Check out the event at the first link in the description for next Tuesday. You're listening to the Marketing by Design podcast powered by AMA Columbus. Let's dive on in. Keeping up with marketing trends and leveling up your career doesn't have to be overwhelming. So don't go at it alone. Welcome to the Marketing by Design podcast powered by AMA Columbus. Join host Andy Milligan every Tuesday as you and I dive into the info that you need to know as a marketer. Whether your goal is to land a job, grow that network, make more money, or level up your career in marketing, you are in the right place. Come for the actionable info, stay for the pressing conversations with industry marketing leaders, and walk away the best equipped marketer ready to dominate your niche. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Let's go.
3 times I go and speak there, I always keep in mind like my experience and how much help that I got that helped me get to where I am today. And so I always say like, hey, connect with me on LinkedIn. Any connections, like look at my network, anybody I can introduce you to, please reach out to me. I've had one person out of like, I did it 3 or 4 times, so that's probably like 125 students. One of those 125 actually reached out to me.
Yeah.
And asked for help, and it blows my mind.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like I'm so glad you said that, because we're trying to help other people too, and it's like you have to make it easy for other people. You have to make the ask. And I think we get like a really self-conscious about like coming across as needy or just saying like, just please introduce me to this person I think could be a great connection. And it's never comes across that way when you do it right. You just say like, look, I would really love to get in touch with this person. They're in your network. Do you mind making an introduction? But you have to make it easy for people, or else people aren't just going to find just making the introduction that gets you kind of going. Yeah. And I totally understand what you said, is that like you can't have this self-conscious mindset around just trying to get help. And I think it's great when you offer your network up to other people, but you gotta have to do the due diligence and say like, okay, if you have one shot that's worth this person's time, who would that be? And how can I position myself, to make it a mutually beneficial relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I wish more people understood that it's one of those things when you're growing up, you're like, man, like adults, like I don't feel like an adult, and I don't feel like I know anything compared to them, and like the crazy untold secret about everybody is doesn't matter what age you are, nobody has it figured out. Yeah. You might have a little bit more knowledge and understand it, but at the end of the day, like everybody feels the same level of insecurity the same, no matter how successful you are. Some of the most successful people are the most insecure people. And,
Hmm.
that's kind of like one of the hacks behind it is like, if you can learn to tap into the insecurity, it can be its own form of like drive and motivation that you're just always afraid of failing. And
Hmm.
that usually will push you a lot harder.
100%. Yeah, you start to grow up a little bit. You start to get into different rooms, and you may see like even the people that these are that were at the top. And I think social media maybe play a bit of a role in it. But you start to see like the people that you hold in your mind as like they have it all together. They're at the top, and then maybe you meet them, or maybe you interview them, or you see them in an event or something like that. And you're just like, wow, like it reset expectations.
Hmm.
But you have to keep that in your mind too, because it's so easy to fall into the trap that you're just below everybody else, and
Yep.
that's why you have to get out there and just not network, but just connect with the people that are trying to build and grow, or motivated, and that share these mindsets too, and are also just lift you up,
Hmm.
especially like talking to other freelancers, just like in different niches, having open conversations around things like the job market and pricing, and all these things that we all realistically deal with. But when it comes to social media, people were kind of like brush it aside, like we want to position ourselves kind of in the best light, and you want to
Hmm.
find that balance of not like being a pity party versus being authentic, and it's so
Yeah.
hard to find that balance. Something that I've like started asking people when like I've met them in person or at a networking event, and they come across you like online, whether they scan your profile or they see a piece of your content, is saying like just having an objective ask, saying like how one to one is this experience? Like what were you expecting? Given the preconceived notions of what you came in with, and how can I sort of like be more authentic moving forwards? And because I think the people that have made the strongest impression on me personally are the ones that it was very came to fruition. Like there wasn't any surprises. They didn't like try to put on a show. It was just like very authentic.
Hmm.
And I think that's a big thing that people kind of value. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think social media definitely kind of propagated it, but everybody kind of has this smell test now that
Hmm.
being authentic can almost be kind of like a superpower and refreshing to people.
Hmm.
And I think it's something that a lot of people try to hide, especially in a professional context. And that's one of the big things that I noticed going from kind of a small startup vibe, like a scrappy vibe when I was at Futurity to the shipyard. And I love I really love working at the shipyard and I grew a ton.
Hmm.
But it
Hmm.
is when you walk into that type of environment, it's super, super clear how
Hmm.
different things are. And you can definitely tell, like, there are some people who really do not want to, they're really trying to guard their
Hmm.
perception within the organization of how people see
Yeah.
them. And honestly, in my opinion, most of the time I saw that, it ended up leading to a lot of like the reasons that people would, have frustrations working with
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
And it's one of those you just like want to tell them, like, hey, just like you're really good at what you do, or you wouldn't be here. Like, just be yourself,
Yeah.
and you will have such
Yeah.
an easier experience. And yeah, I wish more people like understood that, connecting with another human doesn't mean that you're, just totally opening up and vulnerable. I think
Right.
there's way more in Hollywood and on social media about how people are just like trying to stab each other in the back that makes people think they have to be so much more guarded, and it's not the reality.
Right. Dude, I'm so glad you said that. And I think you see that kind of a lot in bigger like corporate environments too. Is like you have this reputation and there's something to be said about having to protect it and maintain a
Hmm.
sense of, we want to attract the best people and really put ourselves in the best light. And it's such a tough circle to square because you never know how far you fall in that spectrum, nor when you're the person that's in it can you really have an accurate judge. It's kind of like a fish in water syndrome.
Yeah.
You're thinking like, okay, what's the perception that we're putting out there? How are we? This is like branding and marketing as a whole. Like, how are we looking to other people? So it takes really knowing like your audience and who you're trying to speak to, who you're trying to attract, which I think is a good segue because that's something that I think makes up a lot of your day to day now. But like sort of touching back on what you last said before we get into your role at Huckle and stuff like that. What was the biggest thing you learned kind of in the contrast between because you have a big portfolio of experience, man, which is really cool, especially in marketing. Like, what have you learned just kind of having the transitions from the more scrappy startup vibe to the corporate culture to doing your own thing to kind of in the middle now and going
Mhm.
back and forth? What are some of the lessons that you've taken away?
Yeah, I had this thing that kind of popped in my head, and I love to talk in analogies. I would say the biggest thing that I've realized in working, whether it be at smaller startup type of organizations versus kind of like your larger corporate 9 to 5 and like big notable brands, is imagine you're an artist and you go into a blank room with blank canvases, white walls, you can do anything. In the 9 to 5 and larger corporate settings, they kind of restrict you as the artist to say, we only paint and create on this size of a canvas. So figure out an idea that's creative that fits within this canvas. But
Mm-hmm.
what I think people are missing is that, well, what if you have an incredible creative idea to create it like this sprawling mural that integrates with different pieces of the wall and different canvases, like how much more impactful that could be. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that really is the difference is people you're given kind of a lane in which you can weave in and out of and be creative, but it's oftentimes zoomed into a level that can take away from really good ideas and creativity. And I think social media has pushed brands to go outside of that. But I think it's so much more all of the different channels and the different areas where you can show up as a brand or a startup or a company that full scale creativity can sometimes be limited. And that's probably the biggest takeaway that I had because there's really smart people at these brands, really innovative agencies, really innovative people. And sometimes there's a little bit of a bureaucratic layer that stifles creativity, sometimes unknowingly. I think you can just get into the day to day of things and not realize that you're kind of in this box that you could be a lot bigger if you got outside of it.
That's a really good analogy. And I think like there's the quote that comes to mind is like constraints drive creativity, and I think there's always an interesting balance to see there too, where you have something like a bigger corporation, they know what works, they know what's gotten them success in the past. They don't want to deviate too much from that. But you always have to innovate. Like you always have to be trying new things, especially in marketing and the things that we do. Is everything's changing, and you have to have a finger on the pulse of what's going on and to be open to new ideas, new people. And yeah, that's a really good analogy. I think you sort of packaged that up really well. Um, from your time at Huckle now, what are the things that are making up a lot of your day to day? Like, what is the thing that you can't stop thinking about and um, fills your mindset a lot these days?
Yeah, so my role is like the founding go-to-market lead, and if you're not from SaaS world, essentially go-to-market is everything that is external facing for growth as well as customer support. So it's marketing activities, positioning, strategy, sales,
Mm-hmm.
strategy and positioning behind the sales as well, and then customer support. And I think what's really unique about where we're at now is there's certain since the early 2000s there's been like landmark technologies and advancements and innovations that have totally exploded and opened the gates for new types of activity to happen, whether it be from a marketing or a sales standpoint. And a lot of times we don't think about like what's the other side of the coin, like what's the repercussion of this being introduced into the world. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what we saw with from strictly a sales standpoint and go to market in general is in 2015-ish when Outreach and SalesLoft came out, and you could basically just send 1,000 emails that were somewhat targeted with a cool idea and a cool tool, and you could set hundreds of meetings just
Mm-hmm.
by pressing a button.
Mm-hmm.
Now flip to today, where everybody, whether you're working in a business or just your personal inbox, you are inundated with so many types of sales emails, promotional emails, all these types of different robocalls, to the point where there's so much signal and activity that breaking through is unbelievably difficult. And I think that's one of the things that, as a startup, you think about what are the most impactful things that you can do. And I think for us early on is just learnings and getting market feedback on our positioning and what we're trying to do with Huckle. And it can be a little bit overwhelming because you're like, I need to get as much signal and activity as possible. But then on the flip side, you think about it from like an objective standpoint and you're like, I would hate to get this email on the other side if I could tell that
Hmm.
you just sent 1,000 like it similarly.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, what we're really trying to do is figure out how to be as creative as possible from a content standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, as well as how can we be very creative and targeted in the way that we're trying to, do our cold outreach to different people. And I think the thing that most people don't realize is possible through AI and things like that, is the level of data that you can get that can kind of drive what you're doing from your outreach. And that's not what I do not want people to mistake this to is like taking an intent tool or like a sales enablement tool like Clay or Persona and just doing a waterfall, getting information about your LinkedIn, your past roles, and then thinking that that's customization.
Yeah.
Because in all reality, that it's not. So I think that's the biggest thing that is on my mind now is how do we be, and to be honest with you, I don't think anybody has totally figured it out. Like we are at a transition point in kind of like go to market where there was a playbook that worked. You could call it the predictable revenue playbook that worked from 2012 to 2024, and companies just exploded and it worked really well. And now it doesn't. And what's happening is people are scrambling trying to figure out how to do that in the constraints of pressures of investors needing to hit quotas, all of those things. So it's almost like people are stuck in this box of, I need to show that I'm doing something. So that's an activity number because otherwise I'm not 100% confident that I can hit the numbers I need to hit from a revenue standpoint.
Hmm.
So I think we're going to see a lot of changes and shifts, and I don't think anybody's fully figured it out. I mean, you could argue some people have, but I think through the next year or two, somebody will eventually figure it out. A tool will be invented that
Hmm.
makes it better, and we'll go through the cycle again. I mean, it's just the inevitable aspect of like how we are humans. When something works, we will hammer it and hammer it and hammer it, squeeze it until the juice is gone, and then we were like,
Yeah.
wow, I have to figure something else out.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really cool. That's a really good summary. And I think there's when you talk about like automated outreach at scale, you want to try and get as personalized as possible. And the hardest thing with outreach is just the social awareness piece of what is it like for the person receiving this,
Hmm.
especially the blinders that it gives you as the person sending it, right? So part of it is knowing the industry, part of it is so far different than that. Like part of it is not even like knowing like the cadence in which people talk, like how they prefer to communicate. It's so and there's different and that's stuff that you is so hard to get just from anything that is online. Um, and like when you think like ordering, like outreach has gotten to a point where it's so inundated that even the stuff that's personalized is starting to get lost in the
Yeah.
noise. Um,
Yep.
so if you start to think like the real differentiator is based on just the trends of where all this is headed is the personalized aspect at scale is the only real way to kind of like circle the square in terms of solving the problem that everybody has. And it comes down to that. It comes down to knowing your audience really well and then having the tools and the resources to be able to maximize your efforts because time is a big constraint. So it's cool to see that you guys are kind of innovating on that front, and it'll be exciting to see when you guys go to market and you guys have a good team. It looks like so it'll be exciting to see it take off. But what are the things that kind of have you more excited day to day as you've gotten more into learning about this stuff and putting together something that you can be proud of?
Yeah, I think what, was on everybody's mind and everybody is talking about it and almost every post on LinkedIn is AI. Everything is AI, whether you're VC investing and you want to hear how people are innovating on AI or people are just talking about what can I do. I think a lot of people are afraid of falling behind, honestly, because it just feels like it's such a major paramount moment that people are like, well, I must be using this or else I'm not going
Right.
to be relevant. And there is some truth to that. But I think something that I heard that was really interesting to me that I don't think a lot of people are really thinking of it in this way is that there's some people out in Silicon Valley talking like kind of behind closed doors, and somebody asked them, how do you see state of AI today. And it's a very well-known guy from Silicon Valley that's been at the forefront of internet, digital, all of those things. And he said his comparison to AI and the state of it today is the internet in 1997. So that's like, if you think about how the proliferation of how fast the internet changed, that's the difference between a Model T Ford and a Ferrari today. Like you would, if you showed somebody a Ferrari today, they'd be like, that's not a car.
Yeah.
I mean, you might because it's got four wheels, but you kind of get what I'm saying. So I
Yeah.
think that we have no idea. AI will look so different in 10 years from what it is today that if we saw it today, we would be like, what do you mean? Like, I don't
Yeah.
think anybody fully understands how different and fundamentally life-changing it will be once it gets to where it possibly could go. And it could be, I mean, like you think of Apple and all the different patents that they have for different types of products. The form factor that they uncovered for the iPad was in a vault for like 7 to 10 years. Like they came up with it and they didn't release it because in their minds, the market wasn't ready for something like that. And if the market's not ready, no matter how good the product is or the service, whatever it is, will not be successful. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the way that we see that. And I mean, like, think of it from like a marketing standpoint. There are some things that Google are working on that I think are truly going to change the way that marketers, whether it's creative, media planning, will fundamentally shift. And I think it's based on like contextualized intent marketing. So essentially what Google is working on, and I think this is something that I believe they've been testing it out a little bit when they acquired when YouTube TV acquired the rights to NFL Sunday Ticket, is they are working on totally one-to-one personalized, contextualized, creative advertising in commercials. And so in the future, what this looks like is that once we get AI that is intelligent enough to essentially take real-time signal, whether that's, micro signals like your browsing behavior, which is already kind of in play, geolocation, weather, or even sentiment based on your activity on social media, whether you're scrolling on Instagram or Facebook, it's going to get to the point where you're going to get a one-to-one ad or maybe a 1-to-100 ad based on a micro segment of micro persona that you're dropped into based on what you've been thinking about the past week. And the outcome of that and what that means is crazy, because if you've ever launched a major creative campaign, you're creating all of these assets. It's millions of dollars to create the advertisement. So I think the way that we go about creating marketing materials is going to also have to fundamentally shift until AI gets to the point where it can create creative at scale, which it's nowhere close to being able to do. But I think marketing as we know it, once that actually proliferates to a place where it's publicly available, will be vastly different from what we're seeing today.
Wow. Then that's fascinating. And it's interesting to hear, and you hear all these things from the outside, and you even start to wonder, like, it's hard to prepare for something that you just don't know. You said it's going to be so different than what you could ever imagine. So, like, how do you remove yourself from your current constraints, kind of like you were talking about with the mural, and say, what if I'm coming into this with not my preconceived notion, like, what would be something that could help this, benefit the right people? I think it's really powerful to see that you guys are kind of reframing your mindset around it and trying to innovate for your own customer base, create a product that isn't within the constraints of your own mind and what we've been previously operating on. Because I think that's the hardest thing, is that we have this constraint, and I see it so much in myself, is you stick to what you know and what is familiar, and you're kind of operating on, especially when things are moving so fast, you're operating on outdated information a lot of the time. Especially when it comes to product creation and trying to create something that for a market that doesn't exist yet. So
Yeah.
that's awesome to see, man. I've seen a little bit of your content and your stuff from the past. You've talked a little bit about like ADHD and stuff like that. What's kind of your experience with that? And you can feel free to disclose as much as you want. But because it's something that definitely affects a lot of people. And I think it's overdiagnosed and in a traditional sense, and that was kind of a hard pivot from where we just were, but hang with me. I think it's overdiagnosed, but I think it's also a superpower in its own right, and the people that can kind of use it to that extent and be empowered by it are, some of the most successful people out there. So can you tell me a little bit about how that's shaped you personally?
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you mentioned the superpower piece of it, because the one thing that I think limits people in having ADHD is a lack of awareness of like what it really means and what it is and how it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's important once you realize what it is, I think like you said, it can be a superpower, because if you think about, one of the most common things that people will reference with somebody with ADHD is like this you get into this zone of hyperfixation
Mm-hmm.
where you become obsessed and you literally want to learn everything there is to know. And so like there's a lot of people, if you know somebody, it's like they know a little bit about everything or a lot about a lot of things, there's a good chance they might have ADHD, because like
Yeah.
they get down this thread of wanting to just research constantly. And I think in a professional setting, if you're able to tap into that and realize when you're in that mode, you can be one of the most productive people ever, because you're just locked in and nothing can distract you. I think in myself, the thing that I've had to realize is that, yes, obviously, like the actual, ADHD, it's here, it's in my brain, it's in my neurochemistry, but
Mm-hmm.
so much of that can be impacted on based on my environment. And the biggest thing that I realized is that I didn't understand or recognize was how big of an impact the environment of being in like a structured corporate setting had on how my brain like activated itself. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I stepped away from that role at the shipyard and into like working on being my own boss, essentially, I don't think I was fully prepared mentally of like how I needed to think about the structure of my day to day, and almost force myself in the same way that like Atomic Habits with James Cleary talks about. If you want to start a new habit, like you need to put micro things, you need to develop micro habits and
Mm-hmm.
create an environment that pushes you towards that. And I
Yeah.
think that's the same thing for me, is that when you have ADHD, you have to make basically force your environment to push you towards something so that it becomes a routine. And then once it becomes a routine, you almost get like obsessed about doing that routine.
Yeah.
And it's you basically have to structure your productivity in those frameworks. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it can be, a change of setting. Like if I'm doing something very productive in the morning, because that's usually when I'm most productive, if I stay in the same environment or don't move or go do something else and divert my attention, I can end up then basically, doom scrolling or getting fixated on some sort of thing that I think could be helpful, but doesn't really lead to the end goal of what I'm trying to accomplish in the day. And
Mm-hmm.
so that could be like, instead of being in my home office, maybe I need to go work in the kitchen, or maybe I need to actually remove myself from my place and go to, a shared working space. So I think that building the tasks that you're doing around this concept of like environment and where you're at is one thing. The other thing that I've noticed in myself is that, I can create routine through perceived reward.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, even in my personal life, for like my health and exercise, I basically developed this like rewards program for myself where I earn points each day for doing certain healthy activities or refraining from like drinking a beer after work, those types of things, with something that I'm obsessed about. So it could be, colognes or shoes or bourbon. And you basically force yourself to earn a certain amount of points to get the reward. And then it almost becomes like a game that you can be fixated on, as opposed to, I just need to do this because I'm supposed to do it.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, dude, so much of what you just said, the like a from the transition from like having more control and really having to show up for yourself. Because I see that a lot, especially with people that have just graduated from college. Maybe they're transitioning to a freelance role and they don't have that structure anymore. That's so me. And I think it comes down to having a positive mindset, being trying just like being an advocate for yourself, because we do those things. We do doom scroll. We do get off track. It's the story you tell yourself afterwards. And empowering yourself to be able to take action and take control. Like, I can control my environment. Distilling it down to things that you can actually change, and not getting into a mindset where you're feeling like you're the victim of your habits or your
Hmm.
preferences. Like, that's powerful, and that speaks to a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that, man.
Hmm.
Because it is that thing that we all go through, and maybe not ADHD in particular, but we do have these things that we do that we're just not proud of. And at the end of the day, you just have to be. That's a big part of like this show and just, the AMA in particular is just, being around other people where maybe you're not where you want to be. And obviously, like, I'm big on accountability being the default. So this is how it is. How can we change it? Like, what can we do given what we have to work with? But also acknowledging that, okay, we're all human and we can take this one step at a time. And what's the things that we can do right now that, put us back on that track.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that a lot, man. But just kind of landing the plane on this. Where can people find you, learn more about you? Obviously, we have our event coming up on the 25th. I'm super excited for that. And to meet you in person and, solidify a real relationship, shake your hand and everything. But where can people learn more about you, keep up to date with Huckle, and just kind of see everything you got going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think the easiest place to connect with me personally would be on LinkedIn. It's definitely something I try to not scroll too much, and I have certain times of the day that I'll do it, but messaging and things like that, I'm always open to connect. I think as far as Huckle is concerned, obviously we have our LinkedIn page for that, but our website is huckleinsights.com. We've got some fun things coming, like, we were launching our updated positioning and our website. We've rolled out some new, what I would call like affordable packages. So kind of under the guise of democratizing access to consumer data that usually was reserved for major agencies or Fortune 100 companies. So we're really excited about the power that that's going to have to level the playing field for any size business, whether, big or small. So we've got a lot of big things coming, and then a lot of updates to the platform where people will be able to access it, play around with it, use it, see the power of what you can do with data. So yeah.